Okay, we're almost ready. Oh, you even got people in your shul. My shul's empty at the moment.
We got, when the photo was taken, it was, I think, one of those open days or something. We had people in the shul.
Okay, so we are live, and good evening, everybody. It's so nice to see so many of you joining us tonight, whether you've joined to hear me or to hear Dovid, or both of us, or none of us. You just came to poke around and see what's going on over here. For whatever reason you've joined, we are glad that you have. And a good evening to my dear colleague and friend, Rabbi Dovid Gutnick. It's so nice to collaborate with you on this fine Tuesday evening, our final evening, please God, forever in lockdown. But we can be wishful and we can be hopeful. And tonight the discussion, please, Rat Hashem, will be one of the upcoming Parshat of the week, Parshat Eikev. It's been a couple of weeks where we haven't been able to be in shul. We also do have a beautiful surprise or finale to our shiur tonight, which Rabbi Gutnick will talk about, which Dovid will talk about. But tonight really is a discussion. It's both of us getting the chance to really talk about the Parshat. And as always, if you do have any questions, you want to add a comment, please use the chat function. Of course, we both, myself and Dovid, I know I'm speaking on your behalf, but I have no doubt you would agree that obviously it's very difficult in terms of being interactive with the people at the shiur, because if we allowed it to be unmuted, it would be a lot of noise. But had you been with us in the shul, if we were in either Dovid's shul or my shul, we would certainly encourage questions and discussion. So feel free to use that chat feature if you so wish. So Dovid, good evening to you. How has your lockdown experience 5.0 gone?
Yeah, Baruch Hashem, been very, very well. And looking forward to learning tonight for an hour or so, and then getting an early night's sleep and re-entering the world. Right. And let's see what we can make of it. We've had 5 reboots at at a functioning society. So let's give it our best shot this time. And yeah, very much looking forward to it. But it's great to learn. Thanks for coming up with the idea. You're the maestro of online kind of community activity. It's become your expertise over the last few months. But yeah, just very happy. Let's learn some Torah.
And yeah, and it's nice tomorrow morning, Bezrat Hashem, 5:30, my alarm will ring, and I'll have to be getting ready for shul, which I'm very excited. And in my case, be able to say Kaddish for my late father. So for those of you who are also able to go to shul and need to say Kaddish, I'm sure you are happy to do so. And if you need someone to say Kaddish, you could always message me. I know Dovid, I'm sure, organizes that as well in various streams. So tonight we're going to discuss Parshat Eikev, the Parsha which will be read this coming Shabbat, Bezrat Hashem, in shul. And yeah, let's kick off with an idea. I mean, there's one idea which maybe I'll start off, Dovid, and feel free to add or change topic or change direction. But I know that it's so popular in today's day and age, this whole concept of mindfulness, of living in the present, living in the moment. And I know when you go through a lockdown, you really do go through questions in your own mind. You know, you start to think about life in different ways. You start to value certain things, I guess, that you didn't really value as much as you should have previously. And there may be some things which you felt are not so important anymore. But, you know, even yesterday, like I remember sitting there and you start thinking, what day is it? And, you know, where am I and what's going on? And it's just one day leads into the next day. And really you need to ground yourself. As Jews, we're lucky because even if we don't have shul, we do have structure. We have Shachrit, Mincha, Mariv. We have certain, I guess, landmarks along the way to keep us grounded and to remind us, okay, you've got to be present at this particular time. But in our parsha this week, it uses an expression that says, Kol ha-mitzvah, all the mitzvah. And many of the commentators ask the following question, that if you know Hebrew, Kol ha-mitzvah doesn't make grammatically correct sense. It should have said Kol ha-mitzvot, all of the mitzvot. And so why does the Torah use such terminology? Why does it use such phraseology? Because we know the Torah is exact. It wasn't like God made a mistake and forgot his grammar when he got to Parshat Eikev. But it is really more so because it talks about the concept of a mitzvah. You know, sometimes, as I was mentioning earlier, sometimes you get involved in a mitzvah, in doing a good deed, and you're not really into it. You're not really focused. You're not really fully functioning at that point in terms of your connection, your mindfulness, your intention. You know, a lovely word, kavanah, intention. And so the Torah was telling us when it comes to a mitzvah, and in fact, when it comes to any act, really, when you're sitting and spending time with your spouse, or you're sitting around with your children, sitting around with colleagues, a friend, when you're talking to your dear friend on Zoom, the Parshat, are you really focusing? Am I really going to listen to what Dovid tells me, or am I going to be distracted? So kol ha-mitzvah, you got to bring in all of yourself to the mitzvah. God wasn't talking about the mitzvah, he was talking about the kol was referring to you. I want all of you, says God, when it comes to doing the mitzvah. I want to see that you're really fully involved and enveloped in this particular action you're doing right now. And children do it the best. Children are amazing at being mindful, at living in the moment. You take your child to the playground and they're into it. They're playing, they're loving life. And then they go to the next activity and boom, they're into it. Now, sadly, we're corrupting them with all these devices. We're ruining that mindfulness. So it's about coming back. So when you do a mitzvah, think about that word kol. Am I putting myself into it? Am I really giving the attention to the person that I'm talking to the things that I'm doing?
I can add one thought to that,
Sure.
Rav Daniel, and that's it actually comes from my current, there's always a self-help book in my lavatory, in my restroom. And the current self-help book that's in there is the first 2 hours. And it's based on some studies around, when we are at our most efficient as human beings in the first 2 hours of the day and how to utilize that time the best. Anyway, one of the strategies she talks about is a 25-minute timer, because we get so distracted today by phones, checking various media outlets, especially when there's sporting events on like the Olympics or other things. We're constantly getting distracted and pulled away by these things. So one of the things she mentions is a 25-minute timer or so, to set a timer for 25 minutes and not to, even though you might get pulled, not to allow yourself to get distracted from that thing for the 25 minutes or so. So I actually started at, such is the degraded state of my attention span, that I actually started with 18 minutes, a very Jewish number. And for 18 minutes of intensity, there's a period leading into Shabbos of the 18 minutes between candle lighting and when the sun actually sets and Shabbos halachically truly begins. And we add to the Shabbos by lighting the candles 18 minutes early, bringing in Shabbos early. But those 18 minutes are for emergencies. And I always tell my wife what gets achieved in those 18 minutes, if we could operate on that level of efficiency and output for our entire lives, we would achieve extraordinary things. We'd be able to build Rome in a bit more than a day. So it's kind of this. I started with 18. She was suggesting 25. The idea is you set the time and you don't allow yourself to get distracted from the task at hand until that buzzer rings and you're free to go. So yeah, the phone might beep or whatever. And actually, when it comes to learning Torah, there's a great tradition that's a sacred time, a special time. You turn off your phone, you allow yourself to avoid the distraction. So the idea of kol ha-mitzvah, being entirely immersed in a mitzvah. In fact, I was having a discussion last night. I was trying to convince a performer, a very popular, well-known performer, to perform at the East Melbourne Shul, especially now that, please God, we're heading into summer and there'll be not as many lockdowns and more people are getting vaccinated. So I really have an aspiration, a dream to have a big musical event at East Melbourne Shul. I was trying to convince this performer, and we got talking about mindfulness and focus and how that doesn't get taught much in the Jewish schools or in schools in general. Staying focused, seeing a task through. And he actually had some wonderful quote. We had a wonderful discussion about this very idea, the kol ha-mitzvah idea.
Beautiful. Yeah. I like the 18 minutes. It's like the matzah bakery. You've got 18 minutes. You have to have your matzah.
Yeah.
You've got to be so, like, if you ever go watch a matzah bakery, like you said, it's like that 18 minutes before Shabbos.
Yeah.
As you described, like everybody's doing their thing. They're into it. There's no mucking around. There's no distractions because, time is money, as they say, but time is also mitzvot. Time is precious. We don't have an infinite amount of time.
And what can happen is you can actually end up aggregating those 18 minutes throughout a day. So the first day I was on this focused diet, a diet of my focus attention. I only got 1 or 2 18 minutes as completed. But on other days, as it progressed and the disciplines became easier, there was, in some days, 10 or 11 18-minute patches of uninterrupted work or efficiency or achievement. And then afterwards, you go for a 5-minute walk, or you take a break, you scroll through your WhatsApp messages or whatever. So it actually becomes quite a competitive little thing. You can see how many you build up throughout the day of focused input and achievement. The kol ha-mitzvah message.
Beautiful. But apropos of that,
yes,
I think that's a great segue. I mean, I love the 18-minute suggestion, the practical suggestion you brought to this, but there's a there's another beautiful, I guess, as I said, segue into, if I could ask you and everyone else who's watching, just to think about a particular question, what's the one thing in your life that no matter how busy you are, you'll like move heaven and earth to make sure that you don't miss out on that. Something you really truly feel that if I don't do this today, or if I don't get this task done, there's something completely wrong. God forbid it has to be, there's probably an emergency, then that's why I can't do it. Is there anything in your life that just really, if you don't get it done that day, or something which you'll do your utmost to accomplish to do? I mean, as an example, I was reading, as you said, during the time in the Beis HaKisei, in the times of when you're in the bathroom, it's time to read certain subjects which maybe you wouldn't really have the blessing of your Rosh Hashiva back in the day to read outside of the bathroom. But in the bathroom, there's certain privileges to read other materials. And I was reading a magazine. It was a fitness magazine, a health magazine, and there they were talking about some people who, no matter what happens, and it was actually a lockdown article about exercising during lockdown, and some of these gym fanatics who would, they don't care where they are. They could be locked in a 1-by-1 cell, and they'll find a way to exercise. Like, they cannot go a day without doing some physical exercise. So is there something, and you don't have to answer the question per se, but do you relate, can you understand such a question where there might be something where people just cannot go a day without? I know some people it's coffee. It could be many different things.
Well, that kind of, the classical Stephen Covey important plus urgent quadrant, that part of your life where things are both pressing and critical, like building on your chazan, the chazan SCHC, the chazan, the idea of perhaps a child's birthday, how that's, classically, something that you move heaven and earth to not miss, or close friends or a dear person's birthday, something like that.
Yeah.
You move heaven and earth not to miss. Of course, we've got built into our rituals of our faith and of our religion, things that we don't allow to pass by, like every single morning. We have a time limit where we have to have davened the Shachris by, and it's absolutely, kind of uncompromising in having to fulfill that religious ritual, because that's the way we've chosen to commit our lives and do our things. And the most interesting thing as a rabbi is and I know this is not necessarily a daily chore, but seeing people that perhaps don't come across as that, engaged in Jewish ritual and Jewish practices, moving heaven and earth to achieve certain practices. So I know some people during the year of mourning will, like what you just started off with, by saying the Mourner's Kaddish for a loved one who's passed away, or a Yortzeit. They will absolutely move heaven and earth. They will, and sometimes when life has made you need to travel, for example, they'll somehow rustle up a minyan in an airport so that they can say the Kaddish for their loved one who they're mourning and who they're remembering. So within our tradition, there are a whole bunch of rituals that we could find, even by people that wouldn't otherwise view themselves as particularly observant, that move heaven and earth in order to keep without compromise.
There was that story that was going around. I'm sure you probably spoke about it somewhere. I think a lot of rabbis used it in a sermon. There was that story about that guy, the American businessman, who went to Israel, and he had never missed a Kaddish, and for whatever reason his plane got delayed, and he landed up landing in the airport at 11 p.m. or at midnight, and all the shuls, of course, had finished Ma'ariv. So he called 10 taxis, and all the taxi drivers arrived, and they happened to be Yidden, in Israel. And he said, "Look, turn your meters on. I want you to stay and answer Kaddish for me, and you can bill me however much you need for the amount of time." And it was quite a powerful story that the guy was prepared to, obviously, so important to him. And then when he finished the minyan and he went to go pay them, none of them wanted to take money. They said, "Oh, what a schut, what a merit we had to be able to help you make a minyan." Now, whether that part is true, I don't know. But why I brought that up in terms of that question, because there's a really interesting piece of Talmud on our Parshat this week. And it speaks about, we in this Parshat, obviously, God, once again, Moshe is going through the history of his tenure as leader and the ups and downs, the highs and the lows. And he talks about over there in the Talmud, it speaks about the mitzvah of learning Torah. And there's a really interesting idea that it says one day when we go to the next world, one of the questions we're going to be asked, there's actually a number of questions that you get asked in the world of truth, if you like. And they say, why didn't you study Torah? Or did you set yourself some time for the study of Torah? And it's quite a confronting question. You know, did I set aside time? And you start thinking. But then the Talmud brings an interesting thing. It says Hillel, there was two great rabbis, Hillel and Rabbi Eliezer. It says Hillel will cause the guilty, that will cause the poor to be found guilty, and Rabbi Eliezer will cause the rich to be found guilty, as if, you know, as if we need any help to be found guilty. And it's a very strange question and a very strange, anecdote that the Talmud brings, that Hillel's going to try and make the poor guilty, and Rabbi Eliezer is going to try and make the rich feel guilty. And the question is why? What's the Talmud talking about? And the interesting thing is that the Talmud was saying that, in life, we're pretty good at making excuses. And so somebody who's poor could say, how can you expect me to have made time for the study of Torah? I don't have a job. I'm constantly going from paycheck to paycheck. I'm constantly chasing my tail. I don't have any opportunity to study Torah. I'm always trying to make a living. And the rich person can then say, hold on a minute, you don't have time to study Torah. I'm rich. I've got 20 businesses I'm running. Everybody's seeking my attention, my time, calling me for charity. I also don't have time. And so both these rabbis, I guess, were pointing out that no matter what point of life you're in, or no matter what side of the spectrum you might find yourself, it's not going to be a valid excuse. But the question then is, well, one second, it seems unfair. What if, in fact, the person doesn't have time to study Torah? So why then should the person be guilty? And there comes the interesting thing. And I have to process this properly, but maybe you can help me digest it. The answer was that it was if you felt guilty enough to actually feel that I shouldn't have wasted the time. Yes, sometimes we don't have the opportunity to study Torah. I might be working. I might have to run to the job. But how guilty do you feel about it? Do you feel like that person I mentioned at the beginning who can't live a day without going to gym? Does a day go by where you haven't studied Torah or had a discussion on your faith, or maybe did a kind action? Do you sleep well at night? Do you feel, okay, I didn't. It doesn't really bother me. That's what the Talmud is saying you're going to be asked. Did it move you when you didn't actually have that opportunity? Did it bother you? Or was it just another day? And a very confronting question, to be honest, I find, but an interesting one nonetheless.
And it's about a little bit about making peace with being satisfied with mediocrity. I had a very close friend who had a big sign in his when we were at yeshiva together in his room, and it said mediocrity. And underneath it, he wrote wretched complacency. It got stuck in my head. He was an English guy who kind of viewed himself as a quasi philosopher. He would kind of wander off into the distance, mumbling to himself. And so, his most hated word was the word mediocrity, complacency, settling for, settling for satisfactory. It kind of made me think a lot. And it's a bit of a segue, Daniel, I hope you don't mind, into actually the beginning of the Parsha, because I've been thinking a lot about striving for excellence or feeling satisfied with merely being adequate without striving for excellence, and the guilt that should come, when you don't continue to strive to grow every single day. And the Parsha called Eikev, and Rashi's famous comment at the beginning of this Parsha is that Eikev usually means because. It's only mentioned about 5 or 6 times in the whole Torah, this word Eikev, but usually it means Eikev asher shama Avram b'koli, because he listened to my voice. This is a word that usually means because, or as a result of. And here Rashi chooses not to interpret it that way. He chooses to interpret the word as when you will keep small mitzvahs that are usually trodden on by the akev shebaraglo, by the heel of your foot. And this idea of disparaging small or minor mitzvahs or not taking them seriously. And I considered this for a while about the idea of seeking radical change and not realizing that radical change actually comes as a result of marginal gains. And I heard this because every young Australian, and I'm sure it's the same with South Africans, we grow up immersed, especially going to places like yeshiva, immersed in 2 things, Yiddishkeit and sport. And I always make the joke that East Melbourne is the precinct of the religious, all the major religions are in East Melbourne. And then the MCG is also in East Melbourne, which is the major religion. And the idea of religion and sport sharing this idea is very exciting to me, especially during the Olympics, of marginal gains and how marginal gains can aggregate to actually become radical gains or radical changes. So for example, you improve small areas of your life, you create small efficiencies in your life, and over time or across a series of different categories of your life, it actually ends up leading to radical change. So these small mitzvahs that people tread on and say they're not really important. I'm going to think of the big picture items, you know, maybe a Shabbos or a kashrus item or something like that. Don't realize that these small elements that are dotted throughout our day, throughout our life, that if we are careful about them and if we improve them, then suddenly they aggregate together to become radical change and radical gain. So it kind of goes back to your idea, because you kind of touched on this idea of settling for mediocrity or not aspiring to achieve something really radical in this world. And that radical thing doesn't have to come about by a major action, but it can come about through marginal gains or taking the small elements that make up our lives, whether it's going to sleep with certain disciplines at a certain time, and whether it's waking up with a certain habit or saying certain words to your nearest and dearest people, small little things that are dotted throughout our lives that end up creating a radically different type of life that we lead. So I think it's a really powerful message from the beginning of the Parsha of Eikev, the excellence that comes through marginal gains or marginal achievements.
I love that. It's such a powerful lesson, and I appreciate you sharing with us, because sometimes people do get so overwhelmed by thinking about bigger picture items or bigger ticket items, and sometimes it's demotivating when you think, well, it's just too far away, it's just too distant from me, this bigger goal that I'm achieving. Whereas, as you said, taking those smaller steps. But I think it's also in smaller actions, in terms of your interactions. I once went, when I was living in California, I went to go hear they had this like fundraising. They sold it as a free seminar and had all these big names coming to talk. And they had Colin Powell. This was after he was Secretary of State, and he spoke. He was one of the guest speakers. And at the, during the conference, obviously they convinced you to try sign up to some package for $19.99 a month, etc. But anyway, he still spoke there, and he said something quite fascinating. He said, the day after he finished his job as Secretary of State, he said it was probably the greatest day of awareness in his life. He said, because for those 4 years, or however long it was, I don't know if he did 2 terms, I can't recall, but for at least the 4 years, the red carpet was being rolled out for him everywhere he was going. He was being greeted like a king, literally. And he said the next day he was no longer the Secretary of State, and he got up in the morning and his wife said, go make us a coffee. And he's like, I've got to go make it myself. Are you kidding me? But he tells a story. He says that in the White House, there's almost like this hierarchy of whose limousine gets taken out first from the basement. And he said his limousine was always the one that was taken out first. And I guess nearing the end, he asked one of the attendees then, he said, look, why do you always take my limousine out first? Why do the others have to wait? And he says, because you know what, you're the only one who walks in and says, good morning, how are you doing? How's your family? And you move on. And they said, like, amongst all of our drivers, you're the only one who that small gesture really went a long way. And he said in his speech, he said, like, that touched him so much that, having meetings with the prime ministers and the other secretaries of state and all the dignitaries, it was that one small step, that Eikev Tishmiyun, that really impacted someone's life so incredibly profoundly. Yeah. So it's not just for yourself, it's also how you impact someone else.
And of course, we couldn't go by the whole night without saying it. It's a lesson from the Olympics as well, because all the elite athletes are so close together, in terms of performance, that often the difference between gold and being a latter place finisher and can be marginal gains. A small shift in the way you do your turn at the end of the swimming pool, or even sometimes the way the quality of your swimsuit, or your tiny little things like that. But it all kind of adds up. A tenth of a second here, a tenth of a second there, swimming down the center of the lane and not drifting from side to side in your lane like they do when they're training. All of these little things you pick up, and you realize that's where that's where the elite level is to be found, in those marginal little things, which should never be trodden on, especially when we talk about in the terms of the metaphor of Yiddishkeit and decency to people, like what you just said, and so on. So that's the big Eikev at the beginning of the
remind me of, when you say the split second, you remind me of one of our teachers. When obviously the internet's been around for a long time, but he always every year he would speak to the it was the bar mitzvah boys at that age, but obviously going through high school, you heard that speech every year, and you'd say, when it comes to typing in a website, because one letter is different and you won't reach your destination. He was so proud of his analogy that, but it was, I still remember it. So I guess it wasn't so bad.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same with me.
I just want to comment, Dovid. I'm very impressed with the seating behind you. I know it's just a picture, but very beautiful coloring that you got there. Is that the actual colors of the shul, the women's section?
That is yeah. So the seats are all different colors. I actually can't see myself, but the seats are all different colors. And that was donated at the time that the shul was doing chairs upstairs, I guess. And it's interesting because we've almost reached the point when we're doing heaps of renovations at the shul at the moment. We've almost reached the point where we do need to upgrade the seats. The padding has completely worn out over 150 odd years or 140, and to the point that like all of the cushioning is gone. It's just the fabric and then the wood. And so there's been some feedback. Shuls are very open to receiving feedback. There's been some feedback that it makes it hard to sit through long services, hard on the tuchas. The thing is that we've recently upgraded our heating to hydronic heating, so suddenly the shul's a lot warmer. I'm thinking if you make the seats comfortable and have a warm shul, yeah, I don't know. It's just they're not going to stay awake during the sermon.
To sleep in your talk,
Yeah, they're going to sleep. Anyways, on the Parsha, there's one other really exciting, but we do have a very interesting twist coming up shortly. But before we get there, I want a couple of other things about this Parsha. It's actually a bar mitzvah Parsha for a few people in our shul, and it's a very special Parsha. But also the Mitzvah of Birchat Hamazon, of the grace after meals. And I thought I'd open that up for discussion as well for a couple of moments, because it's actually the only blessing that is biblical, that is a biblical command. We have heaps and heaps of blessings. I mean, we learned from this week's Parsha, you're supposed to say 100 blessings a day, which is not that hard on a weekday because you've got 18 in your Amidah, and that's already 57 3 times a day. So you're already well on your way, and then you just have to eat and have to bench and a few other things, and you get to your 100 blessings for the day. But it was a great discipline that King David encouraged in particular. 100 blessings in a day. Why not? Fill your day with blessing Hashem. But the only one that's truly biblical, I guess there might be some other prayers that are biblical, but the only bracha that's biblical is the first paragraph of the blessing after we eat bread, the Birchat Hamazon. And it's kind of quite a really significant idea that when we are satisfied, we consume, we're satisfied, and we thank God. Now, here's the dilemma. The blessing before we eat is often quite short and is not biblical. The blessing after we eat, especially if we eat bread and we're satisfied, is a much longer blessing, and it's made of 4 blessings in total. The first one is biblical. The later ones were added on, but they're still very important, and it's a lot longer. So I often have a debate when I sit with the army chaplains. This is kind of an interfaith disharmony type situation, because they all want to do their major grace before we eat. And I say the main grace should be after we eat. And so the ideological debate begins. What do you think? When's it more important to thank God or ask permission for? Well, we do have a blessing before we eat. It's just not a particularly long one. We sometimes wash our hands, we say hamotzi, and off we go. Yeah, so they argue that shows that you're hungry and you're gluttonous and you want to get into your meal. And my argument is no, anybody can thank God and pray to God when they're desperate, like the example of somebody that's in a flood or a torrential, please God, help me. But then as soon as you get what you need, it's very easy then to walk away and take it for granted. The Parsha talks about that as well. So it's there's a certain maturity about after you've been satisfied, received your blessings, then turning to Hashem and thanking him. So we always have this somewhat joking sectarian dispute over blessings before consumption or blessings after consumption. So that's what...
Very interesting. Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I was actually when I was looking at some things to go through the Parsha today, I was in fact literally focusing on that as well, because obviously, as you mentioned in the Parsha, it says ve'achalta v'savata uve'rachta, you should eat, then be satisfied, and then you bless once you're satisfied. But there's an interesting observation when it comes to the blessings of the Torah. When do you make the blessing? you make the blessing before you study the
Yeah.
Torah.
Correct.
When we eat, we are making the blessing after we eat.
Yeah.
So the question is why? Why the difference? Why should? So there's a cute answer which basically says something interesting in light of what you're saying, that there's in marketing, there's something marketing geniuses will tell you, don't sell the steak, sell the sizzle. Because it's the hype. Go to a restaurant and you're starving and you're really hungry, and I shouldn't use the word starving because many of us are not starving, but when you really you want a good steak and you look at that menu and you see the creative English that has been used to describe the steak, and your mouth is watering, and then after the meal you're like, oh, I can't eat for another week, you think to yourself. And so our sages say that it's at that point where the Torah has to command you to make a blessing, because otherwise you would not really be interested in making the blessing. You would walk off.
Yeah.
Whereas when it comes to the Torah reading, when it comes to Torah study, why are we forced to make a blessing before we study the Torah? Because there again, you're like, I'm really not in the mood of this. Like, I don't want to. I'd rather watch the Olympics. I'd rather go and watch a sitcom or go for a run. What are you forcing me to go listen to an hour shiur with these rabbis? There, the Torah has to force you to make a blessing. But on a higher level, on a deeper, more profound level, it was talking the difference between the physical world and the spiritual world, between physical pleasure and the spiritual pleasure. Physical world, the anticipation is such a powerful force, but the pleasure never lives up to the anticipation. And so, every pleasure in the physical world is overpromised and often under-delivered. You get these, as I said, you sell the sizzle, not the steak. And so, in this case, you're obligated to say the bracha after eating, when the actual pleasure has passed away, to remind you that, don't forget where the true blessing is. It's not in the food, it's in afterwards. Whereas in Torah study, it's the other way around. When it comes to things which are meaningful, often the beginning is challenging. Often the beginning feels hard and worthless. Only once you've gone through the whole experience do you realize the value of it. People. I had a uni student years ago when I was the campus rabbi, and I somehow convinced this guy to come to a shiur. I don't know how, but anyway, he landed up coming to a shiur, a Monday night shiur. Maybe it was the free pizza, and afterwards he said that was the most profound hour of his life. And I'm thinking, this guy, he's in his 20s, the most profound hour in his life. And he described, he said, the teachings, and it wasn't me, it obviously was the words that I was sharing, it was the Torah, not me as a person, but it was that there was so much profundity that the Torah was teaching us, that the blessing comes before, to show you, don't think that there's no value in this. Ultimately, the blessing is right now as you start. There's so much blessing that can be brought into your life. So each of those should give you the perspective.
Yeah.
A very important thing.
Yep. Now, very, very true. And it's one of the hallmarks of doing something which you may come to regret, is if the desire is almost too great and the anticipation is such that it's kind of overwhelming. And then the aftermath is often a letdown, or it's often a sense of regret that you kind of, the way you engage in it. And often when it's something spiritually valuable, it's very hard to motivate yourself. Getting up in the morning for shul, for a shiur, like what you were saying. But actually afterwards, you feel quite rewarded. You feel this is valuable. So that's a hallmark of a spiritual activity. So in a way, we're trying to discipline our physical activity, like consumption, to be that way as well, to carry that.
Yossi Jacobson says, he calls it the oi versus the ah. He says, you like ois and you got ahs. He said, usually when something starts off with an oi, it's going to end with an ah. When you go to the gym, it's going to be an oi. You don't want to push the weights, it's tiring. But afterwards, you're going to go, this is wonderful. But if it's the other way around, if something starts with an it's usually going to end up with an oi. When you go to the Kiddush and you see cake and you eat 6 slices, it's definitely at the moment. Delicious. This cake is wonderful, especially at East Melbourne. I was there a few weeks ago before lockdown, and Kiddush was wonderful, but I ate too much. And so I walked home and it was, oi, why did I do that? So always remember, are you saying oi first or are you saying first? And that should be your litmus test.
Yeah, the great hangover 1, 2, and but so many things about Jim, Daniel. You're making me feel inferior on the fitness front. Okay, can we do a joke? Can we do a Parshat joke?
Please.
Okay, Mitzvah of Mezuzah is in this week's Parsha. The Mitzvah of Mezuzah is
last week's Parsha, no?
No, it's also last week, also this week. It says, that the mezuzah on your doorpost is something that's going to lead to long line. We believe very strongly that the mezuzah is a great kind of spiritual protection and security on our homes. Everyone makes an effort. I recently, just before the lockdown, put a mezuzah on somebody's workplace, where usually you don't say a bracha, but you still put one up, and it was a great source of pride and joy for them and for their non-Jewish colleagues and guests to come along as well. It was very special. And the mezuzah is a beautiful, yes, thank you. You also an advert for my brother Ellie, who is the scribe of Melbourne. Of course, get your highly, and I must warn you, Ellie will be very proud of me to say this. When you buy mezuzahs from gift shops, not Gold's, of course, Gold's is a very reputable and excellent Judaica seller, but when you buy mezuzahs from gift shops, often trying to attract tourists, and even in places of Israel, parts of Israel, they'll put a little paper in that mezuzah that's not a kosher cloth, it's not a kosher scroll. It's just, sometimes it's paper, sometimes it's like, help, I'm being held prisoner in a mezuzah factory. No, that's not the joke, by the way. There's all little things that they'll put in there just to simulate the look of the cloth. But the most important thing is the cloth, not the cover. The cover is very nice to have a sentimental cover, a nice cover. Anyways, so see Ellie Gutnick for further details.
If you're South African, you need to have a Carol Boys mezuzah cover. If you don't have a Carol Boys mezuzah cover,
yeah,
you haven't lived. You honestly, you might as well start again,
Okay, so anyway, get your mezuzahs checked at least once in 7 years, and so most people do it once a year. And any time that there's something that's negative or a little bit of a bad energy that's come into your life for whatever reason, the first thing people would do would check their mezuzahs, check their tefillin, and it will give them a boost. Anyhow, story is told, and I had a great experience with one of our own congregants who moved into one of the big housing complexes or apartments, beautiful apartments here on Albert Street in East Melbourne, and the building manager tried to get them to take down the mezuzah. No decorations or ornaments in our beautiful, expensive, fancy building. So, of course, we had to explain that this is a great spiritual ornament that's actually bringing blessing to your entire building. And they stopped badgering them to take it down pretty quickly. Anyhow, so the story is told of a Yiddish guy living next to his non-Jewish neighbor. And the non-Jewish neighbor got robbed at least 4 times in the space of about a month. And the Jewish house wasn't robbed at all. And he said, how does it work? How do you do it? He said, I've got a mezuzah on my door. And the mezuzah protects. The mezuzah watches over. The mezuzah is the spiritual safeguard. So he says, okay, can I do one too? I said, okay, why not? But by the way, generally you wouldn't do that, but why not? So he puts a mezuzah up on his door of his house. Anyways, a week later, he comes running back holding the mezuzah. Take it back. He said, what, you got robbed again? Something happened? He said, no, you know what? I haven't been robbed at all. But instead, every 10 minutes, a mashulach comes knocking on the door saying, can I have some tzedakah? Can I have some charity? So he said, anyways, that's my joke. But really, the mezuzah is a very powerful inscription in a theme that we take very seriously in Judaism, which is called thresholds. Whenever we are moving from one state to another, whether it's Kiddush on Friday night, Havdalah at the end of Shabbos, celebrating a bar mitzvah, which is a transition from childhood to adulthood, whether it's a marriage, whether it's, what time, space, whatever it is, we like to acknowledge, and this relates to the point that you started with, Daniel, the idea of mindfulness. Acknowledge where we're coming from, where we're going to, what we stand for, what values we bring with us as we move into that new space, what experiences we carry with us that shape our view of that new space. So the idea of this important key teachings of our faith on the threshold when we move from our home out into the world, taking those values of our home into the world, and then from the world back into our home, reminding ourselves what we've come for, what we've achieved, and what now is the spirit of our home. It's a very powerful message, an extraordinary message. Yes, see Ellie Gutnick for more. Beautiful.
Well, just on the joke front, there's certain jokes that if you haven't heard this joke, then either you haven't been to shul in the last 50 years, because you guarantee that some rabbis mention it. And we as rabbis, people will say, do you guys share jokes? Because I went to this shul and I heard the same joke that this. And the truth is, yeah, we do share. No, we don't often share jokes, but there's not that many jokes out there that you can.
We're doing it now. We're sharing.
But there's just another, probably one of the oldest jokes in terms of mezuzah was the one about the lady who had a beautiful renovation to her home, and she was convinced by her rabbi to not only renovate the home but to upgrade all her mezuzahs. So she bought beautiful cases with beautiful mezuzahs. She went to Eli Gutnick and got the most beautiful script, the most beautiful cloth, the most beautiful mezuzah you can ever choose. And she asked her builder. She didn't have the ability. Her and her husband both had left hands, and they couldn't put up mezuzah. So they said, look, when you go around, can you put up the mezuzah? We'll make blessings later. When they came back, the builder was looking quite frustrated, and he said, look, thank you for giving me the chance to put it, but I had to throw away so many of the receipts, so many of the instructions inside, and all these different things inside. I chucked them out, but don't worry, I've gotten rid of them. I threw them away, and they're now put up beautifully. And of course, she was dismayed to know that he had taken out all the instruction papers and thrown the mezuzahs in the bin. But it is quite sad, and I shouldn't say funny, but my uncle.
In the chat, you can vote whose joke was better, by the way. Okay.
My uncle, sadly, you mentioned about a lot of times a lot of people don't think how important it is to make sure that the actual parchment is the most important part. My uncle was putting on tefillin for 30 years, and he became religious 30 years later. He wasn't wearing them all the time. Obviously, he wore them at his bar mitzvah and every now and again. And 30 years later, as he became more religious, he got them checked, and there was, in fact, newspaper inside the tefillin. He had bought it in Israel, and for 30 years, he had these pair of tefillin, which sadly did not have the right thing. But just one more quick point. I often use the mezuzah as a gift. We should encourage people to give a newly-wed bride and groom. And in terms of the Ashkenazic approach, that we have the mezuzah, if you look at the mezuzah, it's on an angle. It leans forward. And one of the reasons is that there's two opinions in the Talmud which way the mezuzah should be. Some say it should be straight up, and others say it should be flat. And in this case, the Talmud compromises, and it says, no, you know what, to appease both sides, we'll rest it somewhere in the middle. And I think that's often a very good lesson for a couple when they come into their home. And it doesn't only be for a couple. When you come into your home and you kiss the mezuzah and you see the mezuzah this way, remember in life sometimes you do much better if you compromise. If you allow there to be the space and the opinion of another person, you allow other people to thrive, and you get happy with their success. That's where the blessing of a home truly comes from. So it may not just be that Hashem protects the mezuzah, but I think it's the concept that can really bring the blessing.
It's why it's also why we lean to the left on the Pesach Seder night as well, a little symbolizing compromise, because often Pesach is a great source of debates and disputes. I just made that up, by the way. And also it's the only time I lean to the left. No, I'm joking. I'm a very egalitarian person, progressive. Now, can we do the highlight of the night now, Daniel?
Do we have time for one more quick idea, or we're going to get carried away, aren't we?
No, we're going to get carried away. This is the highlight for me. I paid the big bucks.
Before we get to the highlight, I just want to thank Dovid once again. As we began in the beginning of the shiur, we're going to please God do this again. Maybe we don't have to wait for a lockdown. We might do it in person. I've been threatening a while to see how this would work, actually standing next to each other in a shul.
Yep.
And how we can facilitate this. But
definitely end in blows.
If you are going to be in shul, whether it be in East Melbourne or at South Caulfield, wherever shul you might find yourself this coming Shabbat, or if you weren't going to be in shul, but you might read the Parshat at home, or you might hear the Parsha being laned. Hopefully this has given you a number of insights, some life lessons, and it's always a pleasure to spend time with all of you, to study the Torah, to have insights, and thank you for those who have put comments. You are in for a surprise. It wasn't advertised, so if you're going to blame anyone, you can blame Dovid, but you won't be blaming anyone because
I started hinting it, and then towards just in the last few minutes before we started, I overtly let it out, because the best, as Dennis Cometti, the great commentator, famous said, the best gold medals are the ones you least expect. So this is he said that when Kieran Perkins won from lane 8 in I don't know. Anyways, so back to the issue at hand. What happened is I'll take this story takes us back to Daniel. Can I go? Can I start? Can I introduce?
You can, yes.
Okay.
I might add a word afterwards about the holy man in question.
This story takes it. Well, it may take us back to university campuses and campus rabbis, but a little bit after that, it takes us back to a wonderful centenary of Anzac experience in Turak Shul. And I'm sitting there in my army uniform, watching a young man sing something about Tipperary or something like that. Anyways, some great lyrics from a traditional military song. And in my mind, I think someday I'll be a big rabbi and this man will be my chazan. And as it turns out, I'm still waiting for both to fully be fulfilled. But what has happened is that this gentleman has begun to sing occasionally at our shul. And we had planned for last Shabbos, Parshat Va'etchanan, to have a beautiful celebration of this gentleman's 18th bar mitzvah anniversary. And that's because I wasn't there at his bar mitzvah, and I really feel like I missed out. Other people were, but also that the 18th bar mitzvah anniversary, it's such a profound idea when a bar mitzvah isn't just a one-off event, but it actually occurs as a continuation. It gets reenacted and reoccurs again. It means that hasn't just been something that happened once, but continues to influence. And so we prepared a beautiful Shabbos, but alas, the words "Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami," comfort ye, my people, which is such an important words to hear, were not able to be read around Melbourne this week, and so we missed out on the bar mitzvah anniversary. And a part of our soul for our congregation, but it will help the South Caulfield Hebrew congregation as well, just to hear the words sung "Nachamu, Nachamu," to hear a bar mitzvah boy, because he's still a boy, really, recite the most famous haftorah that we have in all of our prophetic readings and all of our readings of our prophets. So on indulgence, if we can hear a bar mitzvah boy from 18 years ago, almost, well, to last Shabbos, recite the great words of the prophet Yeshayahu Hanavi, "Comfort my people," a time that we need that double comfort. I thought that would be a nice way to finish off our learning tonight.
And I second that. It's a beautiful, very rare opportunity that we get to hear Nachamu, Nachamu recited on Zoom. I don't know if they say that. I remember going on hikes when I was a youngster, and the principal would say, Dovid Chazdan, Rabbi Chazdan, a wonderful man, he would say, the mountains have waited all these since the beginning of creation for the Jewish boys walking through here to sing a Jewish song or to recite something Tehillim. So maybe all of Zoom was created just for Ben to recite his Haftorah. And I don't want to embarrass him, but I recall many years back, as Dovid mentioned, I remember seeing Ben running around in purple lycra, and that is an image I shall never forget. And so I hope that one day when I reflect on my memory of Ben, it won't be in purple lycra, but of this wonderful rendition of Nachamu, Nachamu. No, I'm only kidding. There's been many other occasions. I better unmute you because he doesn't have a chance to respond. Hold on.
And also, we're going to show the actual text of the Haftorah that we're going to read now, so you can follow along. And I must warn you, or not warn you, but encourage you, these are the most powerful and rousing prophetic words that we have in all of Jewish literature. So do try and follow along. We missed it in Shul, but you're going to hear it here now.
But I just want to thank Dovid and Ben Shkoyach for doing this for us. Ben is a doctor, a wonderful doctor, emergency room specialist. So he's not only a great Haftorah reader, but he saves lives in other ways too. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see the?
No.
Now?
Yes. Nachamu.
All right, Ben, you want to say something?
Over to Benjamin, the great Benjamin Cohen.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Dovid. Hello to the congregants of South Caulfield and East Melbourne. It's really nice to be here, to be a part of your shiur and with you all on the last night. Amen to what you said earlier, Daniel. Hopefully it's our last lockdown, but we've been behaving ourselves, and everyone, it's nice to celebrate the end of it with you all. I personally had no issues with the purple lycra, and I'm very happy for you to remember me by that, just as much as my singing. Possibly was singing back then as well. Also, just a couple of things before I start. So, Nachamu, you mentioned obviously that it's very important to put in concerted effort to throughout our lives to make sure that we're not missing even the small actions, and that these actions can really contribute to a huge amount more. Certainly that's the case. I hope you're not okay.
Daniel, we've lost
going to Facebook Live. I hope you weren't bringing up a picture of Monash Uni days.
There it is.
I forgot.
Yeah, so it was immediately evident to me when I was practicing for the Haftorah. As you mentioned, it's 18 years ago that I've done that I did this Haftorah, and I just started reading, and it just comes back to you. It just stays with you. So something that I rehearsed and rehearsed, like we do in our own lives, those small actions that we rehearse and rehearse, they stay with us and they do contribute to the whole. So anyway, that you guys are the speakers. I'll do some singing. So with no further ado. Nachamu, nachamu, ami, yoma Elohechem, daberu alev Yerushalayim, bikiru eleha, ki mala'at tzva'a, ki nirtza avonah, ki lakecha miyad Adonai, כפליים בכל חטאותיה, כל קורא במדבר פנו דרך אדוני, ישרו בערבה מסילה לאלוהינו, כל גיא ינסה וכל וגבעה ישפלו, והיה הכל למישור, והחסים לבקעה, ונגלה כבוד אדוני, וראו כל בשר יחדיו, כי פי אדוני דיבר. כל אומר קרא, ואמר מה אקרא, כל הבשר חציר, וכל חסדות כציץ השדה, יבש חציר נבל ציץ, כי רוח אדוני נשב בו, על כן חציר העם, יבש חציר נבל ציץ, ודבר אלוהינו יקום לעולם. על הגבוה עלילך מבשרת ציון, הרימי והכוח קולך, מבשרת ירושלים, הרימי אל תראי, אמרי לערי יהודה, הנה אלוהיכם. הנה אדוני אלוהים, וחזק יבוא, וזרועו מושלה לו. הנה שכרו איתו, ופעולתו לפניו, כרואה את רוע יראה, בזרועו יקבץ תלאים, ובחיקו יישא, הלוד ינהל. ממדד בשעלומים, ושמיים בזרת תיקן, וכל בשליש עפר הארץ, ושקל בפלס הרים, וגבעות במאזניים, מי תיקן את רוח אדוני, ואיש עצתו יודיענו, את מי נועץ בבינהו, וילמדהו באורח משפט, וילמדהו דעת, ודרך תבונות יודיענו. אין גויים כמעמיד לי, וכשחק מאזניים נחשבו, אין איים כדק יטול, ולבנון אין די באר, וחייתו אין די עולה. כל הגויים כעין נגדו, מאפס בתוהו נחשבו לו, ואל מי תדמיון אל, ומה דמו תאכלו לו. הפסל נסך קרש, וצורף בזהב ירקנו, ורתוקות כסף צורף. המסוכן תרומה, עץ לא ירכב יבחר, חרש חכם ויבקש לו להכין פסל, לא ימות, הלא תדעו, הלא תשמעו, הלא הוגד מראש לכם, הלא הבינותם מוסדות הארץ, היושב על חוק הארץ, ויושביה כחגבים, הנותק חדוק שמים, וימתחם כאוהל לשבת, הנותן רוזנים לעין, שבתי ארץ כתוהו עשה, אף בל נטעו, אף בל זרעו, אף בל שורש בארץ, גזעם וגם נשף בהם ויבשו, ושערה כקש תשאם. ואל מי תדמיוני וישווה יום הקדוש. שאו מרום עיניכם וראו מברא אלה, המוציא במספר צבאם, לכולם בשם יקרא, מרוב אונים ואמיץ כוח, איש לא נעדר.
Yasher koyach, Yasher koyach, beautiful.
Amazing.
And you kept the crowd. You kept the crowd. That's
Yeah, never in doubt. Can I make a l'chaim to Ben?
the only thing I have to drink is hand sanitizer, Marcus.
I've got a good whiskey.
Ben,
Yeah.
if I drink hand sanitizer, we'll have to come see you professionally.
Depends how much you drink. Get into it.
That was beautiful, Ben. Mazel tov. We hope we can have a nice kiddush, especially after exams at the shul. But maybe next time, instead of the rabbis yabbering on for an hour, we can have the chazanim singing for an hour. Might go very well.
Right. But
Well,
anyway,
yeah, I mean, I think maybe I can't speak for Danny, but I think it would be nice to get a bit of a choir. And I'm not sure if Brett's still here, but I saw him lurking earlier.
Yeah.
and our cousin Greg, I don't think he may have left, but he's done a wonderful job at South Caulfield to get guys involved in singing, and it's beautiful. So thank you, everybody. I'm just going to end the live stream on Facebook so we can now talk freely. No, okay.